Hey, what's up guys, it's DoubleZug. So somebody linked me a clip of this Take Note TV stream who's like a good warlock player from Noda, and he did a tier list for MoP. So we're going to be doing some extremely low tier React Andy content here. So he made a tier list of all the tier lists for MoP, and he put me in B tier. First of all, he was hating on me for being a healer, which is just typical, right? We as healers, we're just third-class citizens. We constantly get the anti-healer propaganda from DPS and tanks. But you know, this is par for the course, we just accept it. And it is sort of for good reason, right? Like there is kind of a zero-sum fun thing going on here, whereas a healer, you really want to have fun. You want to drop healers to the point where like you're barely living. Which is not super fun for tanks and DPS. And for tanks and DPS, they want to just be safe and never die and just parse. So there's a little bit of conflict there, but you know, we healers, we do have to advocate for ourselves and yap and Discord and annoy people, because it's just, you know, it's what you have to do. So the other reason he put me in B is just because the tier list was 50 minutes long, which is 100% fair. I do extreme yapping here. But really what I'm here to do is like, this just gave me an idea where I'm not going to make a DPS or a tank tier list for MoP. I could if I wanted to clickbait, but I don't feel like I have enough experience with every single spec, DPS and tanking, and like every single tier to actually just give you like an informed opinion that would add something to the conversation. So what I'm instead going to do is direct you to some other people who have made tier lists that I think are actually good. And I think that this ranking is actually decently accurate. So first of all, for tanks, this Tawny dude who has like 48 subs, basically like no other videos, just like random other videos. This is like the first classic video he's made. But this is like actually really good info. It's only 5 minutes long, but dude is a very experienced private server player. So if the meta looks anything like it will on private servers, which it's almost certain to, there's not like that many things that could really change, barring like massive vengeance nerfs or something, which I just don't think they're gonna do. This is really good info. He also goes in depth into like off tanking, 10 and 25 man, main tanking, utility stuff. So to kind of summarize his takes here, I think for 10 man, he's basically saying like brew main tank, prop pally off tank is like BIS, and this is like kind of the solved quote unquote 10 man raid comp. I basically agree with this. I think that the resto disc is obviously insane for 10 man. The DPS composition is a little bit more flexible, I think. And the main tank and off tank, I do think prop pally is really good off tank, and I do think brew is like kind of cracked in 10 man specifically, although it is also really good in 25 man. So I tend to agree here, although, you know, for 10 man, I feel like there's some wiggle room here. But overall, I think this 10 man take is pretty good. Also, as a healer, brew is definitely really nice to heal because stagger just smooths out your damage taken a lot. And also brew, like whenever you can get like AoE, you'll just be doing like a ton of absorb and also just spawning an insane amount of like your healing spheres. So brew definitely feels really good to heal, especially on fights where you can cleave. But I think for like classic, where people are going to be a lot more likely to be like main swapping around and stuff, and not just like playing the same character for every single phase like a lot of people do in private server, I think prop warrior goes up a little bit in off tank, just because prop paladin is like kind of weak before you get all the your like haste, and prop warrior's thing is like, it's fine. It doesn't really have great self-sustain, but it has a lot of really nice utility with like banners and rally and like, you know, vigilance / safeguard for the other tank that does like a little bit of an estimation of, you know, like hand sack and eternal flame and stuff like that. Also, warrior DPS is just like way better than ret. So I do think that prop warrior is a little bit better as an off tank. When it comes to 25 man, I also do kind of agree that blood DK is like insane, especially from a healer POV. Blood DK does a lot of self-sustain, and also it does like kind of a significant amount of raid healing with bloodworms, which is something that not a lot of people mention. Bloodworms kind of crank, and they do scale with vengeance. And they aren't like Brewmaster can do some really insane self-healing and also some good AoE with like the Ox statue absorbs, which you'll definitely be seeing in like challenge modes where that thing just goes off with like the mass AoE, but it doesn't like really work on single target. You're not going to be doing a lot of like raid healing as single target. And while some of these other tanks can do some stuff, like, you know, Feral can do some spot healing with like their healing touch talent thing, and prop paladin can do really insane spot healing with eternal flame. I feel like that bloodworm like raid healing is actually just really nice, especially if you're aggressively dropping healers. The blood DK like self healing and self sustain and insane cooldowns, plus the like extra raid healing from bloodworms, is just gonna be one of the best for like dropping healers. Although like the raid DR stuff, like your Devo Aura and like Avert Harm and your banners will also help with that a little bit. I just think Blood DK is like pretty crazy for 25, so I definitely do agree with this rating. I also think that him mentioning that Bear Tank scales insanely well in Siege is interesting. Not something I've seen a lot of people mention. I do think Bear Tank is like pretty good, kind of a sleeper pick there. When it comes to the off-tank stuff, I also do generally agree with his ranking, although I think Prot Warrior like might be taken in phase 1, especially if you don't want to bring enough Arms Warriors to get like your full Skull Banner coverage. Potentially you might take a Prot Warrior instead of a Prot Pally. I don't know. It just remains to be seen, obviously. I also think it's really interesting that he goes into all the off-spec gearing stuff, which is very, very good info again. But yeah, generally I generally agree with this ranking. So really good, really good info from Tawny here. Definitely check him out, give him a sub. So that's for tanks. For DPS, I'm going to mention 2 things. So Malvanis, this is, I think he is actually like a really good Resto Druid player. He's playing in Kata. He has like some Resto Druid videos on here. This tier list is really good. It focuses on tier 14 progression. He goes through all the specs. I think his healer takes are good, his tank takes are good, but also the DPS stuff is good. The second thing for DPS I'm going to mention here is Select a Game. So this is another like sub 100 sub channel. This is another also like private server gamer. And this guy has really good like interesting stuff to say about DPS. And he also ranks things like per phase. So I think this per phase ranking is actually really important, especially for like DPS and tanks. Whereas for healers, I don't think the rankings really change much, if at all, over the phases. You know, Resto Shaman and Disc Priest start out really insane, and they just kind of scale really insanely well too. And they're so stackable that like really you're kind of just arguing over like that 5th/6th healer spot, whether or not it's going to be another Shaman or Disc, or whether or not you need to get some specific utility out of something like maybe a Druid. So the rankings don't really change that much through the phases. However, especially for some of the DPS that really rely and are tuned around like multi-dotting and some of the broken trinkets that get added in the later phases, you will have like a very significant change in balancing. And it's actually something similar to Cataclysm, where in Cataclysm, a lot of the classes, especially the healers specifically, were kind of balanced around Dragon Soul. And so for the previous 2 tiers, there was a little bit of iffiness around the kind of the balancing and how healing felt. The same thing is true in MoP, and especially for these DPS classes, where classes like Warlock and Shadow Priest and Boomkin and Feral Druid are going to have like a very huge come up across the phases as you get to these pieces of gear and these trinkets that they're really balanced around. Where if you look at his tier list for phase 1, it's actually going to have a lot more spread and a lot more classes in the lower tiers than if you look at the final list for Siege of Orgrimmar. You can see most of these lesser performing specs actually move up. So the balance of MoP, especially for DPS, but also for healers too, is just going to get better and better as we get closer to Siege, because MoP was a more modern expansion where there was more tuning around the gear that they added, and a lot of that gear was like actually kind of disgustingly broken, as well as just how classes scale with higher secondary stats. So something to keep in mind that some of these DPS specs that are going to be really bad in phase 1, something like Boomkin, Fire Mage, BM Hunter, Shadow Priest is like decently pretty bad. A lot of these specs are going to have their come up, and especially like end of TOT into Siege, you're going to have a lot better balance between the DPS specs. So again, something to keep in mind. Also some really good info from this tier list as well. Also his like tank and healer takes are, I think, pretty good as well. So those are the 3 sources I would recommend if you are interested in DPS and tank stuff. Again, I'm going to link those below, and I will just like give the disclaimer here that the tier list stuff, it's kind of clickbait, right? It's mostly for entertainment and just giving you information. And especially in Mists of Pandaria, I would expect some variation from the private server meta, just given how complicated like scripting, and there's kind of a lot of bugs on private servers, and the meta is just a lot less developed because there's a lot less players on private servers. So I would expect some things to be figured out. I would also expect some strategies to be slightly different on Classic, just because, you know, the way that some boss mechanics interact with like certain immunities or certain ways of soaking or cheesing mechanics might be different on Classic. So there is still a lot to be seen with respect to like accurate sims and different strategies and stuff like that. The meta is going to become a lot more developed just because a lot more people play Classic, and they play it in different ways, where private servers are more focused on like progression, and people are not as likely to like main swap as much and go for speed kills or parsing or whatever, because that stuff just really doesn't exist and has developed away, and the player pool is just so much smaller. So just obviously take all this tier list stuff with a grain of salt, but I would definitely value the private server experience decently highly, especially just for like just the general basic information. A lot of people like had memories from original MoP, and it just changed a huge amount over the course of the patches with balancing. So I would definitely preference looking through logs. I'm not going to do this for DPS and tank because I just don't care enough and I'm lazy. I'm not going to comb through like every log and interview all the good private server players for every spec. So yeah, again, I would just preference like the private server experience, which is why I'd recommend these 3 sources, just because they're smaller channels, so you might not see this content on your feed. But this is definitely, like, of all the stuff that's out there, I think this is the best stuff for DPS and tanks. So that's the end of my my B tier yap here. So definitely go give these 3 dudes like a sub. Hopefully they'll be making more content. There's not a lot of people making content for MoP. It's basically just Scotty J is like the one guy who's big, and Jordy obviously does boss videos and stuff. But like the more of this content that's out there, the more hype there is, the more people will play MoP. So thanks for watching, like, subscribe, comment, etc. Again, I will be coming out with in-depth guides for every single healer spec sometime before launch, so if you're interested in that, I'd definitely stick around and subscribe.
Swobu, Zug Zug.